Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well, or at least the best they can. And we have a couple of things to talk about tonight. I would ask you to reach out and send some more questions if you can. I don't really want to get to the point where I'm making them up myself because that means that uh, we're not dealing with stuff that is on your mind. So, the best I can, I'll try to answer this one. And this one is from Greg. Todd Gregg in Toronto. And he says, can you elaborate on the relationship between the intellect and higher states or spirit? Does the intellect tend to get in the way or is it helpful? Sorry, I've got hiccups. This is a really complicated question. And people have been attempting the best they can from a scientific point of view and all other points of view to make some sense out of this idea of brain, nervous system, mind, personalizations, and emotions. And it gets pretty confusing. So I'm going to do the best I can with this. And then I'll try and talk about how that mind structure might be something that could be very, very helpful in linking up with higher states, but it's complicated. So I'm just going to do the best I can. And for those of you who read a lot and try to make some sense of other people's versions of this link up between mind and our personas, you'll realize that sometimes you'll think one way and then you'll think another way. Well, here's another way you can think. So to answer this question, what we have to do is begin to try to understand this thing that we call a personality. And this is from my point of view, remember. You'll all have your own, but here's from mine, the best I can. A personality is a form of energy. It has physical engagement within it. We radiate energy. It's what we do. We're energy forms. So we radiate a physicality in the personality. We call it us, I, all of these names. Then we have intensity that comes out of us that expresses itself with gentleness, kindness, loving, being miserable, being angry, being frustrated, being adamant about a whole lot of stuff. And this is energy that we have learned to use our voices with, and we use it, we intensify and express ideas, concepts about how we are, all the rest of it, or ideas that relate to creativity and science and arts and spiritual stuff. But these are created through a form that we have cultivated literally since being in the womb. It's just how we respond. And these are reactions and activity that we can utilize because we've learned how to do that in terms of an expression. Like I just said, in terms of an expression. So we're using that personalization to express ourselves somehow. And we do this, every one of us does this. 8 billion plus, we all do it. And we call that thing a personality. We study, we engage with other people's ideas, we read newspapers and all kinds of whatever we read online. We do all of this stuff. And then we come up with ideas that allows us to think that the ones that we come up with are valued. While unfortunately engaging with other people's ideas that seem to make some sense now, right now. Tomorrow, maybe not so much, unless you begin to defend these ideas as if they were gospel truth. This is a dilemma, because all that is going on in a reflexive mode that is emotional and intellectual, so to speak. You know, what that means to me is the brain is functioning and making sense of stuff, cultivating kind of semi-memory. Those who have great memories can cultivate and engage with a whole lot of material and come up with ideas that relate to those things that they have been involved with. That includes their experiences as well as their reading. One without the other, well, we're devaluing learning in a kind of a way. We have a dilemma with these things that we call personality. And I'm not sure that that gets right into this question. So let me just elaborate on the relationship between intellect and higher states. Does the intellect tend to get in the way of this topic? So I have to be careful with this. I want to stick to the subject matter. So here we are. We have this thing we call a personality, and we're quite smitten with it. It's the way it is for all of us. In my world, I would call that we are in love with ourselves, exactly the way we do, and we defend that loving without knowing that that's what it is. Be that as it may, it's what we do. It's just one of those things that are real. And we adjust these things if we're fortunate, if we're lucky. And we do that through the auspices of a thing that we call our intellect. We figure stuff out. It's more like figuring out, in some cases, responding to an idea that is not quite ours, and then having a reaction that we don't want that idea to come in, because if it does, it's going to change our way of seeing things. That's what we do. Nations do it. Everybody does it. Corporations do it too. So we have a boundaried system. And the boundaries are quite profound. And one of the dilemmas in all of this was our mental facility, often called the intellect, being different than mind, this concept of mind, which is kind of similar to, in a kind of a way, to this emotional, reflexive, intellectualized form. And that does not mean it has many levels of evolvement. Many levels. Does not mean it's because it's in your head, it's right. It just means it's there in your head. That's all it means. So, this concept of energy, emotionally expressing, kind of mentally, intellectually, accordance to what we can allow ourselves to express relative to how we've been brought up is different than mind. Your mind is not two-dimensional, right, wrong, good, bad. This is the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Your mind is not like that. Your mind is a form or this is where it gets difficult. A field of consciousness that can interact with the cultivation of this physical system, this brain and nervous system, and feed into it which might be focused on by the emotion and its cultivation of a system that makes some sense and we can do some logical stuff with it, or an intellect. None of these systems are negative. None of them. As a matter of fact, they're really important for us in our relationship with existence. But they are stages of development. The thing that really fascinates me is that a field of consciousness, for example, that may be mine, field of consciousness, which may be emotional, kind of intellectually focused, put things together as we believe we sense them to be true. And these systems are valued, but they are connected to other people's similar systems. Wow. Well, just a minute. This does get complicated then. Why? Because if we engage with a harshness, we are connecting to a field of energy worldwide that relates to harshness. Thank goodness we don't know how to use it for our own purposes. We only know how to use our personality for our own personality purposes. Then how would it we connect to loving on these planes? Yes, that will be strong within you under certain conditions that relate directly to the points of reference that the personality believes it needs to use for its own comfort, its own constructed system's comfort, to maintain it the way it needs to be maintained, to set a value on the individual who's doing that. This is obviously an oversimplification as well, because we have links with other levels of emotional responses, thinking responses, ways things need to be, or should be, or shouldn't be. These are fields of levels of engagement that a personalized system, which is energetic in nature, can link to engage with its own self-interest, its own love of self. Love of self is not negative. Love of self is how we do things and how we believe. We don't think of love of it, but we think how we believe things should be. This is a real dilemma because there's a multiplicity of different views in the world. If you talk to 8 billion people, you'll have some similar views, but usually there's different views. So these are energy fields that are all around us. Hard for us to understand this because we don't talk this way in relationship to an engagement with life. But when we engage with these things, There is a pull within us. We've done this reflexively. We've learned how to do this. We pull to bring energy in to express it. We don't realize we're connecting with others who have the same kind of intentionality related to needing to be the only right. This is all over, and all of us do it. There's no doubt about that. You think about this for a few minutes, and you'll see that in your daily life, you engage with life and you attempt to engage in a way that validates whatever it is that you believe might be true. Even the smallest of things, surface stuff. And thus the difference begins to appear. Not easy to notice, not in our relative understanding of how life occurs, how our engagement with others affect others, and theirs affects us energetically. Energetically, I'm talking about. But here, the difference is that mind is a different thing. Mind includes the surface stuff that we engage with every day. And nobody likes to hear that because surface stuff is not what we do. We do deep stuff. Yeah, sure. But this surface stuff is deep in us. We're often waylaid, pushed in different directions by our own emotional reflexes. And that's where we are. I can't see anything that is negative about that, except when you look at the big picture. Gosh, it makes us feel bothered because we are quick to judge others because it's there to be judged. And in our world, in 30 seconds, we know what's going on in another part of the world. But let's get back to mind. Mind is a form, energetic in nature, same as emotion, constructed systems within the emotional construct that brings a mental level to bear, the thing that we call intellect. So here we are. Mind is not only two-dimensional. It's multidimensional. There's a third structure. Within 1 second, you can react as if you're 10 years old, as if you're 3 years old. If you've had trauma of any kind, trauma of the simplest kind is somebody tells you you're doing something wrong, and you don't think so. Well, at 3, we were right into it. And more. Continued on. Sidestepping, engaging with life, trying to figure stuff out, coming up with some ideas, trying to come up with others, trying to put forward something that others would think would be okay. Mind knows this. All of it within us. It has the capability of watching us in action individually. That means we have the capability of watching us in action on a 3-dimensional level at least. But if we're talking about past, it's a 4 at least dimensional level. If you look at time as a 4th dimension and space, 5th dimension, sort of. It can go back and you can act out in a nanosecond the way you did when you were a teenager. Because you're hurt as a teenager, for whatever reasons that may be. There's accumulation of a bunch of stuff that may link in there. And you link into that, and that is linked into a field of consciousness of all beings who are hurt, relatively speaking. various levels of that, not all the same. But nonetheless, you have a reflexive engagement with that level instantly. If you're touching mind at all, that's being conscious of it. Being unconscious of it is automatic. You do that automatically, emotionally, and kind of intellectually or mentally. And there we are as a human being. Another dilemma. Way back in the 70s and 60s, and we were talking about the fifth dimension as a spiritual plane or an engagement with spiritual levels, higher states, often related to as higher mind, higher manas, higher state of engagement, meaning nobody knew. But everybody's definition of what spiritual would be would, for some, be called that. Well, here's an interesting thing. As you engage with each other, as you engage with yourself, and start noticing, because your awareness has increased, what and how you are acting in relationship to what you think might be valued, you can begin to notice that you're acting the way you were acting when you were frustrated when you were younger. Extreme defense, extreme anything. It's a terrible thing to say, actually, but not uncommon in our world. Our world is a growing, learning world. We are trying to engage with a higher level of a kind of mentality that the Buddhists would always call Buddhi, the Buddhi world, the higher level of emotion that enabled you to watch emotion and see how you were engaging with it and not necessarily agree with it, cultivating a higher mind state, which allows you to look and see and not judge how you got to be the way you were. This is really not easy for us to understand as human beings. All of us have difficulty with this. And it's really easy to talk about it. But when you're engaging with it experientially, an aspect of that persona or the personality formulation that we have cultivated from the time of our engagement with the womb speaks out and does not want to be changed. So when change is beginning to occur, there is a strong sense of need, first of all, to see how you've been trained, and second of all, to allow it to shift or change, because we have fallen in love with how we have been cultivated by us, by others, by our culture, whatever. So this is very hard to listen to and very hard to talk about too. And the other aspect of it is, I mean, if you do listen to this kind of thinking, this is only like a precursor to it. When you're engaging with higher states will kind of enable you to perceive that which is in you, and you're not comfortable with it because we don't look very deep because it's too difficult for us. But if we could look deeper, we would find loving in there for us. So we use that all the time, like our own ideas. like the way we present them. We want others to be like that until they are, and then we don't want them to be like that, of course. You can see the humor in this, and you can see the sadness in it, and you can see the frustration, but also you can see the hope. This is a very interesting dilemma because there's a thing that begins to happen. So you need your emotional orientation, you need that intellectual construction. Learn as much as you possibly can and do that so that you're cultivating the wherewithal within the mind to allow that higher state or higher mind to engage with and help to broaden out that understanding of life, existence, better than we can do it ourselves because our logical system is fairly slow. Well, maybe this is all we have for a while. Maybe this is part of our growing to have such a thing. And I believe it is because of the nature of how we function in our world individually. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about it as negative or anything. I'm saying, look, we do things this way, whatever that this way may mean. And then the next point is learning how that is, not as a negative thing, just as something that we do, just a thing we do. And then in the old traditions of every religious background and philosophical background, if people were doing that to you, would you be happy? And the answer, inadvertently, is often not so much. Except maybe if they agree with you, then there is a sense of balance in the world, meaning agreement is the thing that we like to engage with so that we can feel comforted by ourselves. Yeah, I know. Very, very difficult to explain, but not negative. It's how we push the envelope of our boundaries by inquiring, asking questions that are different than the ones you've already answered and already believe the answers are the only truth. This is very uncomfortable for humanity. Individually, we all make up humanity. This whole business of having frequencies that are common to all people. If you think about it for a few minutes, okay. In other words, there are tremendous fields of consciousness that are expressing themselves from the subtlest loving to the most aggressive, from the thoughtful person to the clever person, where all of these things are used by all of us for the purpose of trying to make some sense of what we come up with without wanting to go beyond it. This is very difficult to do. But you have to learn how to respect a learning process. This one's hard. I find it just as difficult as anybody else would be. If I suddenly engage with a state that I wasn't used to, even a state of questioning that I wasn't used to. So I can understand, because I live it, the difficulty in considering it possible that our questions aren't really related to ourselves, in a kind way. But we have responses that are knee-jerk, that are unkind to us. I'll give you an example. If you're always angry all the time, you hurt yourself, meaning that becomes one of the things that are cultivated inside for the purpose of being valued, and we don't know that. Same is true of almost anything you can come up with that marks you as an individual, that is ideally perfect from your perspective. This idealization can be very difficult for us. It doesn't leave you to open, doesn't leave you to question your own stuff. Questioning your own stuff doesn't mean you get the wrong answer, that it's all wrong. It means you begin to slowly understand deeper your relationship with how you have learned how to function as an energy form that we call personality, made up of many levels of engagement. It's very fascinating. I was talking to an individual one time, and she was having a dilemma. The dilemma was, through an engagement with trying to increase her perception by increasing her awareness of her, she began to realize fundamentally that she didn't want to do that, even though she was becoming more aware. Because she also found out that she couldn't stop attempting to do that. And I said, have you ever taken a holiday? And she started to laugh. And she was right to laugh. Because, you see, the personality is quite something. It has many facets. You have trained it that when it starts something that may be helpful, even to it, even though you have these other things that may be helpful from your perspective, the personality is trained to want to attempt to continue, to go deeper, to understand better, not to judge, to understand better. But within it, we've also created this reflexive response where judgment is something that emphasizes the personality and its value and its importance. I remember talking to a prophet, very bright guy. He says, Ron, I don't understand what you mean by criticism. I said, okay, I think you do, but anyway, I'll go along with you. And I said, look, if you really want to be a critic, look for something constructive to be helpful with. Your best critics in all things try to improve individuals. If they're actors, they try to be helpful in their version so that the actor can become better than they were. The actor won't like that. The ones that are really not that great and really not helpful criticize and devalue, but no helpfulness is there. Because this person was the kind of prof that was involved with this kind of thing, he looked at me and he says, I absolutely never thought of it that way, but I totally agree. Taking a course with this individual in writing, for example, the first thing that he would consider valuable is trying to see how we could improve the writer. excuse me, the writer. So he would make a little note and say, this might improve your writing. That is a real critic. That is something that is helpful. If you can take that on when you're doing that with yourself, your awareness will increase because the personality is set up to be helpful in a strange way, to show you things that might be beneficial if you could soften them just a little bit or engage slightly differently, this kind of thing. That comes from a link with mind, where mind doesn't have that you're bad because you do this, you're good because you do that, and the stuff that we have all been trained to do. Mind level comes in to be helpful. And your system is set up to be a part of that. Also, it's set up never to change from what you were. That's sobering to me, because all of us are involved with that, at least to some degree. This is tough for us, human beings. And it's characterized by a look back in history. We were talking about this the other day. And looking at history, you see that there are certain things that were consistent in our history. And nobody liked them except the people who won in them. And this continues today. We are young in our relationship with communication with others, and our relationship with trying to understand beyond what we already think we know. This is very difficult for us, very hard. So we do the natural thing. We continue to do what we did before, hopefully slightly less. But now, in a world of increasing consciousness, one could say, as perception increases, with it comes an increase in the intensity that you use on a daily basis. Those reflexes are strong. And they underline things that have been in the past, but we can't ask questions about them. Why do we think this way? What is this? What is this? Is this normal in our planet? You may find out that it's uncomfortably normal. But the next stage, as far as I understand, is to recognize the relationship that we have with learning and that we are young. Look at it this way. If you had a child, you, whoever you are, had a child that you loved. If you've never had children and worked with them, you'll come up with an idea of how that child should be brought up. But when you're right in the middle of bringing a child up, you're also bringing you up. This is very, very difficult for us. That child, in a kind of a way, is us. Strikingly difficult to make sense of. The child itself is pleased with how it functions. It has a level of loving for itself that has no interaction with questioning. we don't live life like that, really, walking around questioning everything we do. So increased perception helps you to perceive it a little bit more or perceive your defenses as necessary to maintain how you were before. And before does not have a time on it. If you have been frustrated most of your life, that timeline goes way back. We don't see it. We don't even see it or even think that it could be that way, but it does. Mind at that level knows that. And what you're trying to do, all of us are trying to do the best we can, is to see how we are and be respectful of that, but not necessarily agree with it all. This is very hard for us because basically we don't want to do it. But sometimes we do. And in those moments, mind has the possibility of linking within our emotional state, within our intellectual state, in those moments, making a little tunnel down into those systems so that when you're engaging with life from time to time, you want to say this, but you do it a different way because suddenly you find out that another person around you is now doing it different too. You could have swore they were going to do something else, but they don't do that. They do something because you've shifted, they're shifting. This is hard to see, but in the early goings, it'll show up. It's not an alignment. It's a perspective that is slightly different than what they had before or what you had before. Mind levels can help you in that. In those higher manas or higher mind levels, that is a relationship with the beginnings of higher state. And it goes right down into the core of us. And it loves us. Let's see if I answered the question. Excuse me. Can you elaborate on the relationship between the intellect and the higher states or spirit? Does the intellect tend to get in the way or is it helpful? It is my understanding that the intellect is a tool for broadening out and being used by a higher state in this way. Broaden out how you think. Don't only go looking for what you believe. What you believe will still be there. You'll notice yourself padding what you believe. If you can see that, you'll understand how an intellect works. It's the nature of it. That is not a negative thing. That is kind of an interesting thing because if you see it, you can then watch you doing it. And you could say, well, this is what I want to do. Or you could say, this is really interesting. I can actually see myself doing this to promote and defend what I do. Because this is what we are taught to do. This is the construction of an intellect for the purpose of maintaining a focus on our individual value because it comforts us. And that feeling of comfort is a feeling of love and valuable to us in that, if we feel comfortable, it's better than feeling uncomfortable. I would agree. So, slow growing, in my understanding, is a very valuable thing. And that includes being the way we are for a time, just so we can begin to see it and wonder about, is there something a little broader than what we've made up our minds to see? I really, really hope I've touched on that question a little bit, Todd. If you have other questions about that, please send in something. And everyone else, I really appreciate the questions that you sent in. Please, I know some of you have never sent some in, but it's part of learning and try to figure stuff out. And I'll do the best I can with it. Of course, it doesn't mean you have to think my way. It just means I'm doing the best I can with this one. I think it's almost time to meditate. And tonight, I'd like to try something that we tried before, and I'm not sure it worked before, but I'd like to try to use my iPad for music. And I don't know how it's going to work, to be honest, so don't be afraid to call if you can't hear it.
Or if you hear weird things.
Or if you hear weird things. Let me turn okay, I'm taking the visual off, but the rest is going to be on. Pardon us while we move things around. Whoops. Great. So far, so good. This is Sacred Chants of Davy. Of Davy. If there's anyone in Ottawa, if you cannot hear it, please call us. 661 or text us. And now we'll just begin to do the balancing and grounding, and have a good evening. Good night.